Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, you guys know I love to talk about movies and their impact on our understanding of history and even their inspiration for what parts of history we find ourselves interested in. There are some really good historical movies out there. There's some really bad ones. There's a lot in between. And there's a lot of debate about how much of a responsibility that filmmakers have to getting the history right. I, for one, am of the school of thought that if it's a well-made movie that gets people interested in the real history and leads people to go learn the real history, I'm not as concerned about whether or not they play fast and loose with the facts. So an example of this for me, I think the example a lot of people use is Braveheart. Terrible history, but fantastic movie if you're looking for entertainment. But don't look at it as your source for history. But if it leads you to go learn more about the real history, then it's done its job, I think. On the other hand, we've recently had the movie Napoleon, which wasn't even that great of a movie. It just was kind of these snapshots all thrown together. It felt very disjointed. It just wasn't really enjoyable at all. And then there's a lot in between here and there. So today we're going to take a look at this video. It's called 12 Historical Movies Where They Clearly Didn't Do the Research. So we know they're coming at it from a pretty strong viewpoint. The name of the channel is called Startefacts, and they've only got about 2,500 subscribers. But it looks like he's got a couple of different videos on this topic of historical movies. So I'll put the link down in the description if you want to check out the channel and see what else they've got to offer. This video came out about a week ago, and it's got 13,000 views. So we'll see how we do. And like I said, if you like what you see, please go and check out the original content creator. Let's go ahead and dive into this one.
Hollywood loves a good historical drama, but sometimes the desire for a compelling story overshadows the need for accuracy. These movies might be entertaining, but let's face it, the filmmakers clearly didn't spend much time fact-checking. Here are 12 historical movies where accuracy took a backseat to drama.
Well, and here, let's just lay it out here to begin with, right? Your job as a filmmaker is not to be a historian. It's to make a movie people are going to be entertained by and want to watch. So storytelling is the primary concern, not historical accuracy. And a great example of where people want to do both, where they want to be historically accurate but also recognize the need to tell a story, is Band of Brothers. It's a 10-part miniseries where they set up front, like Tom Hanks, who produced it and directed some of it, said, listen, we're going to have people doing things they didn't do or they would never have done, or saying things they wouldn't have said, because you have to combine characters in some points because the audience can't keep track of 150 different guys. You're going to have guys taking their helmet off when they never would have done so because we need people to be able to identify them. So those are the kinds of things that we can forgive in a historic tale because we understand the need for storytelling and connecting an audience. But then there are times, and I'm sure we'll get into some of these, where it seems like there was no good reason to change the story. Like, it doesn't add anything to the way the story is told. It maybe even detracts from it. So I guess we'll see. Be curious to see which movies they choose.
Braveheart. Let's begin with an epic that no list of historical inaccuracies would be complete without. Mel Gibson's Braveheart. While it's an engaging piece of cinema with passionate speeches and grandiose battles.
And that's the whole point behind what Mel Gibson was trying to do, right? He wasn't trying to tell a historically accurate documentary. He was trying to make a good movie.
Its association with actual history is tangential at best. Firstly, the portrayal of William Wallace as a Highlander clad in a tartan kilt is centuries off, given that the tartan kilt did not make an appearance until around the 16th century, a good 300 years after Wallace's time.
And as I've talked to a number of people from Scotland who say even the whole idea of different tartans, like, the patterns and the colors associated with certain clans, is really kind of a modern invention and really not taken as seriously by people who are actually in Scotland as it is by people who kind of want to connect to their Scottish roots.
Furthermore, the depiction of the Battle of Stirling Bridge without, well, the actual bridge is a glaring oversight.
Especially because that bridge is a vital part of why that battle went the way that it did.
It's like calling a movie Titanic and forgetting the ship.
That's
rebellion
fair.
has begun.
Under who?
William Wallace.
He rallies new volunteers in every Scottish town.
We've come to fight and to die for you.
Stand up, man. I'm not the Pope.
Another Mel Gibson.
So we'll stop right there. I mean, we've talked about Braveheart before, but some other things, obviously, the idea that he had a relationship with the future Queen of England, when in reality he died when she was still a kid. The fact that they show Longshanks, Edward I, dying pretty much at the same moment that William Wallace did, that didn't happen. The fact that they call William Wallace Braveheart, when in actuality, Braveheart was Robert the Bruce, who's kind of a side character in this movie. Those are just some of the things. There's obviously a lot more to it than that. But and so I see we're going to get into the Patriot, and I'm just going to say up front, even though this one also has Mel Gibson in it, you can't blame Mel Gibson for this one. I see a lot of people say, oh, Mel Gibson hates the British, that's why he did it. Mel Gibson was an actor in this movie. He didn't write it, he didn't direct it. So this one, less Mel Gibson's problem and more the problem of the director. I think it was Roland Emmerich, this one.
Gibson classic, The Patriot, might have stirred our emotions, but it also played fast and loose with historical facts. Gibson's character, Benjamin Martin, was based on Francis Marion,
loosely,
the real-life swamp fox of the American Revolution.
And Francis Marion was such, I mean, he's not a guy that a lot of people know about today, but huge hero, especially in the American South in the years after the Revolution. Go to places like Kentucky, where my family's from, every family had a kid named Francis Marion. On my direct mail line, my father's father, going back to my fourth great-grandfather, his name was Francis Marion Snowden. On my mom's side, everybody had a brother named Francis Marion Gearhart, and Francis Marion Greenhill are a couple of my uncles. Very, very, very common name. Francis Marion and George Washington, it seems like every family had kids named after him. He was a big-time hero.
However, the film conveniently omits Marion's slave ownership and paints him as a family man opposing slavery. The biggest historical stretch, though, might be the film's depiction of British soldiers as ruthless, church-burning monsters, a claim that has no historical basis.
I will say this, and I've mentioned this before in other videos, while it definitely is way over the top in its portrayal, first of all, I should say that in the Carolinas, where this movie is largely set, it was vicious, it was dirty, it was a civil war. You had loyalists fighting against patriots. They were all Americans. Yes, there were British troops down there especially once Cornwallis is leading the Southern campaign, and Bannister Tarleton, who the character of Tavington is loosely based on, was a pretty ruthless guy, and there were some massacres of soldiers. No, there was never a village that got sent into a church and burned, and civilians by and large weren't massacred like that. But loyalists and patriots did often kill each other that way. Hangings were common. If you were on the wrong side and you got caught by the other side, that happened quite a bit, and it could be very, very dirty and vicious. So this takes that to an extreme and definitely overplays it, and Tarleton never did anything like putting a bunch of people in a church. And yes, I agree with the idea that it would have been much more historically accurate to portray Mel Gibson's character as a slave owner. There were people who felt that way about slavery in the South. John Lawrence, whose father was president of the Continental Congress, was an American patriot who served on the staff of George Washington, who did believe in this idea of arming black troops and giving them their freedom.
I thought you were a man of principle.
When you have a family of your own, perhaps you'll understand.
When I have a family of my own, I won't hide behind them.
Hang him, put his body on display.
Colonel, I beg you, by the rules of war.
Would you like a lesson, sir, in the rules of war?
Or perhaps your children will.
If you've seen 10,000 BC,
Never seen
you'll
this one.
understand why it's included in this list. The film depicts the construction of the Egyptian pyramids in, well, 10,000 BC. The problem? The pyramids weren't built until around 2600 BC. That's about 7,400 years off the mark, give or take a century. Add to that the appearance of domesticated horses and chickens, which weren't around in that era, and you've got a prehistoric mess with abysmal 9% on Rotten Tomatoes it kind of deserves.
I mean, listen, this is before written history, so we really have no idea what was going on then. So really any movie that's made, obviously some of the stuff they're talking about, like the pyramids, we know that pyramids weren't built then. So that's something we can definitely say ridiculous. But anything that is plausible, we can't really debunk because we don't have written history. Never seen it, never had a desire to see it though.
We always believed we were alone in this world.
This one will lead our people to a new land.
300 is a visually stunning film that has spawned 1,000 gym memes, but accurate history, it is not. The film takes...
Again, this is another one. It's based on a graphic novel, almost like a comic book type thing. I don't think anybody took it as real history, but there are elements of real history in all of it.
Takes considerable liberties with the Battle of Thermopylae. King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans did fight against a larger Persian force, but they weren't alone. They were part of a larger Greek force of about 7,000. The Persians' number wasn't in the millions, as the film suggests, but closer to 100,000.
We don't really know exactly how big the Persian army was. The people who wrote about these things tended to exaggerate one way or another based on what their biases were. There was at least 100,000, probably more than that. I would guess. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more like 200,000. But he's right. It was thousands of Greeks. Leonidas was like 60 years old when he died at Thermopylae. But I mean, the main characters are all real people that really existed. The battle really did happen at a place called Thermopylae, we know as the Hot Gates. You go there today, it's difficult to get a concept of it because of erosion and things like that. It looks nothing like it did at that time.
150,000. The portrayal of Xerxes as an 8-foot-tall, nose-pierced god king is laughably incorrect. Also, the Spartan soldiers wore full body armor in battle, not just capes and speedos.
Yeah, that's 100% true.
Tonight, we dine in hell!
And I will say this, some of the quotes that they use in 300 do have some basis in the things that were written about the story at the time and in the years afterward, so those aren't completely off base.
Be afraid! Sparta will burn to the ground!
Really good movie, though. Come on. Entertaining as heck.
Madness. This is Sparta!
And the funny thing is, Gerard Butler said that when he did that, he had done a bunch of takes, and that one was one that he just kind of did over the top that he never thought would actually be used, and that was the one they went with.
Oliver Stone's Alexander
Haven't
made
seen
a
this
heroic
either.
attempt to chronicle the life of Alexander the Great.
This one was like lambasted so much by people that I never bothered to watch it.
But unfortunately, the factual bloopers are as grand as Alexander's conquests. First off, Angelina Jolie, playing Alexander's mother Olympias, is made to appear as a snake-worshipping witch when there's no historical evidence to suggest this. Additionally, the movie has Alexander openly flaunting his bisexuality. While there were rumors about his sexual orientation, no historical documentation confirms this.
I will say this. I don't know as much about the Greek history in this time period. You know, we're talking a couple hundred years before the Roman Empire comes to power. But I know in Rome, bisexuality would not have been seen as such a major, no-no. So you wouldn't have to flaunt it. I think it's more of an idea that it was just kind of accepted that that's how a lot of people were. I don't know if that's the case with Alexander or not.
Moreover, the Battle of Gaugamela, shown as fought in the harsh daylight, actually took place in early morning hours to avoid the heat. Finally, Alexander's death, portrayed as a result of poisoning in the film, remains a mystery in real life with multiple theories, including natural causes.
So if it's a mystery, then of course the people making the movie are going to go with the one that's the most compelling and the most provocative. Poisoning. I mean, in plenty of situations, they do that even if it's not the case. A great example is if you've seen the recent TV show that just came out, Those Who Are About to Die, or Those About to Die. They show the Emperor Titus as being murdered. Titus only reigned as emperor for 2 years, and most historical sources say he died of a fever. But that's not interesting. It's a lot more interesting to show that there was a plot by his brother to have him killed so that his brother Domitian, could take over. That's more compelling, even though none of the sources say that. So if some of the sources are saying poison, yeah, that's what they're going to go with. I'm not really too worked up over that.
A king isn't born, he's made.
What would you do if you ever reached the end of the world?
Never will there be an Alexander like you. Alexander the Great.
Ridley Scott's Gladiator is an undeniable cinematic masterpiece, but falls short when it comes to historical accuracy. The protagonist, Maximus Decimus Meridius, played by Russell Crowe, is entirely fictional, as is Commodus's depiction as an inept, whiny emperor.
I wouldn't go that far on Commodus. I wouldn't say he's an inept, whiny emperor. He certainly wasn't as bad as how he's portrayed. I wouldn't call him good either.
In reality, Commodus ruled for a good 12 years and was known for his athleticism. The film portrays Commodus's death in a gladiatorial combat, whereas he was actually assassinated in his bath. Additionally, the movie showcases an early version of the Praetorian Guard, Rome's imperial bodyguards, as corrupt and loyal only to the highest bidder.
I don't know that I'd call that an early version of the Praetorian Guard. They've been around at that point for a good 100 years or so, haven't they? And as far as them being the highest bidder, they did execute. I mean, they killed like a dozen emperors, the Praetorian Guard did. And sometimes they were known to put someone in power who had paid them well and stay loyal to an emperor who pays them well. That's not a huge stretch to me, the part about the Praetorian Guard being kind of sold to the highest bidder. I mean, I don't really remember that being what happens in the movie. They're pretty loyal to the emperor until they're not at the end.
Which is a gross misrepresentation.
I don't think it is. The Praetorian Guard had a lot of power and influence, and they used that often to decide who would be the emperor.
Tell me your name.
My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius.
Fantastic movie, though. Oh my gosh.
Of the armies of the North. Loyal servant.
I would say movies in a historical setting with historical figures in it, which this one has, Commodus, Marcus Aurelius, people like that. Probably one of my top 10 all time, just in terms of how good a movie it is. Such a good movie.
True Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Father to a murdered son. Husband to a murdered wife.
And a great ending, too.
And I will have my vengeance in this life or the...
The 2004 film King...
How do you cut that quote off, in this life or the next?
Arthur makes a brave attempt to depict a historically accurate Arthur, but ends up muddling things more.
First of all, we don't even know if Arthur existed. There probably was somebody on which the stories of King Arthur were based, but not a king in the traditional sense, and we really don't know for sure who Arthur was and what his story was. So it's going to be difficult for me to accept that we're going to criticize a movie about King Arthur when we really know next to nothing about whether the guy even was a king and who he was.
The film is set in the late Roman Empire and posits Arthur as a Roman officer. The problem? The Arthurian legend originates from the Middle Ages, centuries later. The movie's Saxon invaders also arrive too early on the scene. And let's not forget Guinevere, who appears as a skilled warrior woman. While it's a cool concept, it's not one found in any historical texts about the period.
My father told me great tales of you. Fairy tales. People so brave, so selfless that they cannot be real. Arthur and his knights.
So really, I mean, I guess the complaint here is that it's set in a particular time period, and that particular time period isn't portrayed accurately. And that's a fair criticism. You can do this and do it well with a fictional story set appropriately. The perfect example of that is Master and Commander: Far Side of the World, which tells a fictional story in a historical framework and probably portrays that time period and the warfare of that time period more accurately than any movie has. So it can be done and done well. So that's a fair criticism.
Disney's Pocahontas might be an entertaining animation, but it's a historical mishmash.
And I'm going to take this one personally because both of my parents are descended from Pocahontas. So this is my ancestor 3 times over.
In the film, Pocahontas is a young woman when she meets John Smith, whereas in reality, she was about 10 or 11 years old. That's some stuff they clearly couldn't show you, though. Their romantic relationship is also a fabrication, as the real Pocahontas married John Rolfe, not Smith. Plus, the villainous Governor Ratcliffe is shown leading the Jamestown expedition and causing conflict with the Native Americans, when in fact he arrived later and was more of an unfortunate leader than a villain.
Hello, John Smith.
The tree is talking to me.
Then you should talk back. Is
that Mel Gibson? I guess it was. Sounded like him. So Pocahontas actually becomes a Christian, gets baptized with the name Rebecca, and goes with John Rolfe, her husband. They have a son, Thomas Rolfe, goes with John to England, and she dies in England. She doesn't have immunity to the diseases in the European world and dies in her early 20s. She's buried at a church in London.
Oh, I like her.
Hookworm has asked to seek your hand in marriage.
I think my dream is pointing me down another path.
What are you doing here?
I had to see you again.
You'll be turning your back on your own people. I can't leave you.
The Last Samurai provides a fictional account of an American military advisor embracing the samurai culture he was originally hired to destroy. While the film beautifully showcases the Bushido code and the samurai way of life, it misses the mark historically. Firstly, the character of Nathan Algren, played by Tom Cruise, is entirely fictional. The Satsuma Rebellion, which forms the movie's climax, involved many more samurai, not just...
So there were 500 samurai in The Last Stand, but there had been more than that. And the samurai were not like just sword-wielding ancient warriors. They were not averse to using firearms and things like that. It was much more complicated than that. And there was an American advisor who was a part of Japan raising this new conscript modern army that they had. So again, it's not that, like, while his character is fictional, there are elements of truth in the story. Just he didn't like go to the other side and go, die or fight at Shiroyama.
Just a band of warriors. Also, the samurai were not the Luddites they are shown to be.
Right.
By the late 19th century, they had actually started adopting Western weaponry and tactics.
Yep.
Lastly, the portrayal of Emperor Meiji as a weak puppet controlled by his advisors is highly inaccurate.
And this was really a clash of classes. This was the idea that this warrior class who, like, you were born and raised as a warrior and you were a lifetime warrior, was being phased out and pushed to the side in favor of a modern army of guys who enlisted or were conscripted, was something that they didn't want to sit idly by and watch happen.
He was actually a strong, modernizing leader.
Again, good movie though, just not history.
What do you want?
To know my enemy.
I've seen what you do to your enemies.
The epic movie Troy promises a thrilling tale
I wasn't a
of
big
love,
fan of this one.
honor, and war, but it stumbles on the historical front, equally epically. A glaring inconsistency is that the whole Trojan War supposedly lasted 10 years, not a few weeks as shown in the movie. The mighty Achilles, played by Brad Pitt, is killed by an arrow to his heel from Paris. However, in the original mythology, Achilles was made invulnerable as a baby by being dipped in the river Styx, except for his heel, which is where Paris ultimately strikes him, a nuance completely missed in the film. The characters' costumes and weapons also...
Well, I can forgive that because they were trying to take the myth, like the supernatural part out of it. And they don't show him dying from the arrow to the heel. It just incapacitates him so he can be killed. And he's just a great warrior in this story. So I can kind of forgive that one. Honestly, it's just kind of a bad movie.
Resemble Roman designs more than ancient Greek. probably a case of mistaken identity by the wardrobe department.
They will write stories about your victories for thousands of years. But if you go to Troy, you'll never come home.
We can't win this war.
Apollo watches over us.
And how many battalions does the sun god command?
They're coming for me.
And the sad part is with this, you got some really big name actors in this: Peter O'Toole and Brad Pitt, and is that Diane Kruger, I think, in there? Eric Bana is in this.
Elizabeth, The Golden Age.
This was a good movie.
This film offers a dramatic look at the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, but several inaccuracies pop up. The film shows Sir Walter Raleigh as the Queen's romantic interest, but in reality, their relationship was likely more platonic than passionate.
So there's a lot of rumors about Elizabeth and her relationships that she had. We know her as the Virgin Queen, but she certainly wasn't that. This is a sequel to the first Elizabeth movie, which kind of picks up with her early reign, where she comes to power after her sister Mary dies, and starts out as this innocent being taken advantage of, but kind of comes into her own by the end of the movie. This one is more about her clash with Spain, and kind of culminates with the destruction of the Spanish Armada.
The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, is shown as a direct response to a failed assassination attempt on Elizabeth, which oversimplifies the complex political scenario of the time.
It was, though, the direct result of threats against Elizabeth's rule, including a failed coup attempt, really. So that's not a huge stretch to me. Mary, Queen of Scots was the next in line to the throne if something happened to Elizabeth, and it was actually her son James who would actually succeed Elizabeth.
The Spanish Armada, a critical part of the movie, is shown as a nighttime battle, while the actual combat took place during the day.
That's really just kind of a visual thing. That's not a huge deal to me.
Your king, I fear neither him nor his armies.
There is a wind coming that will sweep away your pride.
I too can command the wind, sir!
Oh, and Cate Blanchett is just awesome. She's also really hot, but anyway.
I have a hurricane in me that will strip Spain bare if you dare to
Yeah, you tell him. Yes!
The Other Boleyn Girl presents an intrigue.
That was he really didn't have a whole lot to criticize there. Honestly, pretty minor. Certainly not one of, like, if I'm thinking of 12 historical movies that really botched the history, Elizabeth the Golden Age isn't in my top 12. It's not even in my top 50, I don't think. This one was horrible.
Intriguing tale of romance and rivalry between the
Eric
Boleyn
Bana makes another
for
appearance.
the love of King Henry VIII. However, it's more fiction than fact. The film depicts Anne and Mary Boleyn as close in age and growing up together. In reality, Mary was likely the elder sister, and Anne spent a significant part of her youth in the Netherlands and France.
Wait, so let me get this straight. Your criticism is that the film portrays them as close in age, when in reality Mary was likely the older sister. But they were close in age. They did both grow up together in the court in France. They both did have affairs with Henry VIII. I don't see the criticism here.
The dramatic scene of Anne's miscarriage, causing Henry to cast her off immediately, is also distorted. Anne did suffer a miscarriage, but it was not the immediate cause of her downfall.
It was definitely a part of it, though. It was definitely a factor. It was part of a series of events.
Who are you?
Marry, Your Grace.
The Other Boleyn Girl.
Yes.
Honestly, it was just a bad movie.
Mary, you've obviously made a deep impression on the king.
What?
That was very kind of abrupt the way it cut off. So, all right, so there's that. It gave us something to talk about. I wasn't really that crazy about some of his choices there or some of his criticisms, but there were also some really valid ones. What would you add to the list? Let me know in the comment section below what movie you think really is just terrible for history, unforgivably so. Let me know in the comment sections. Before we go, I just want to say thank you to Cameron in Warren, Massachusetts, and also Graham in Kings Langley over in the UK. Thank you both so much for your support on Patreon. Could not do this without you. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.